In 1790, a dying man signed away 1,000 pounds of his own money and asked for nothing back. Not for himself, not for his children. He asked that the money be locked away for 200 years. 2 centuries. Long enough that everyone who knew him, everyone who loved him, and everyone who might have thanked him would be dead before a single penny came home. Why would anyone do that? And what happened when the vault finally opened? Stay with this one, because the ending is not what you think. The man's name was Benjamin Franklin. You know him as the face on the $100 bill, the man who flew a kite in a storm, one of the founders of the United States. But there's a part of his story almost nobody talks about, a financial experiment so strange that for 200 years, cities argued over it, lawyers fought over it, and ordinary people's lives were quietly changed by it. Here is where it starts. Before we get to the money, we need 30 seconds on the man. If this is your first time here, hit that like button right now, because what you're about to hear will change how you think about every small decision you make with your money. Subscribe to, and turn on the bell, because we tell stories like this every week. Now, back to 1785. Franklin was almost 80 years old. He had already helped write the Declaration of Independence. He had already negotiated the treaty that ended the Revolutionary War. He was, by the standards of his time, one of the richest and most respected men in America. And he received a letter from France. A French mathematician had written a satire, a joke, mocking the endless American optimism about the future. In the joke, a fictional rich man leaves a small sum of money in his will, locked away to gather interest for 500 years. The Frenchman meant it as a punchline. Ridiculous. Nobody would actually do that. Franklin read the joke, and he did not laugh. He wrote back and said, "Essentially, that is not a joke to me. That is a plan." And a few years later, in the final version of his will, he made it real. He left 1,000 pounds to his native city, Boston, and 1,000 pounds to his adopted city, Philadelphia. In today's money, each gift was worth somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000. Not a fortune. Not the kind of gift that makes headlines. But here is what almost nobody knows. Franklin did not want the money spent. He wanted lent out, 5% interest a year, to young married tradesmen, men who had just finished their apprenticeships and wanted to start a business, but had no savings and no rich family to help them. Men, in other words, exactly like Franklin himself had once been. He had started as a poor apprentice printer with nothing. This was his way of reaching back through time and giving other poor young men the one thing he never had, a first chance. And then he did something almost nobody does with money. He waited. Picture this. It is 1790. Franklin is in his final weeks of life, worn down by illness, still writing letters, still thinking about the country he helped build. He signs the papers. The money goes into the trust, and he dies at 84 years old, having personally made sure that not 1 cent of that gift would ever benefit him. He would never see it grow. He would never see who it helped. He gave up all credit, all thanks, all control. Why would a man do that? This is where the story stops being about money and starts being about psychology. Most people, when they have extra money, want to see the result. They want the new car, the vacation, the thing they can point to and say, "Look what I did." Franklin did the opposite. He was betting on people he would never meet, in a future he would never see. Economists call this thinking in terms of your future self, almost like a stranger you're choosing to take care of. Franklin took that idea and stretched it 200 years into the future to strangers who had not even been born yet. But we'll come back to that. First, let's talk about what actually happened to the money, because the real story is even stranger than the plan. For the first 100 years, the trust worked almost exactly as Franklin hoped. Young tradesmen in Boston and Philadelphia borrowed small amounts, paid it back with interest over 10 years, and used that first loan to open a shop, buy tools, start a life. Generation after generation, quietly, without headlines, without anyone thinking twice about it, the fund kept growing. Franklin himself had done the math by hand. He predicted that after 100 years, each city's fund would be worth around 131,000 pounds. He was almost exactly right. At the 100-year mark, in 1890, both cities were allowed, under the terms of the will, to pull out a large portion of the money for public works. And here's where the story splits into two very different paths, and where the conflict really begins. Boston mostly kept its remaining share locked up, invested conservatively, letting the compounding continue quietly for another 100 years. Philadelphia took a different approach, using more of its fund to keep making small loans directly to individuals, closer to what Franklin had actually written in his will. Both cities believed they were honoring his wishes. Both cities were also tempted, again and again, to raid the fund early for other projects. Franklin, remarkably, had anticipated even this. He had written specific warnings into the trust, trying to protect his gift from the very people meant to manage it. Here is the twist nobody expects. Franklin's original math predicted that after the full 200 years, each city's fund could be worth over £4 million, an almost unbelievable sum for the time. That did not happen. The world Franklin's plan was built for started to disappear. The apprenticeship system he designed the loans around slowly faded out as factories and modern employment replaced small workshops. Interest rates changed. Cities withdrew money earlier than the plan intended. The clean, perfect compounding Franklin had calculated on paper ran into the messiness of 200 years of real history, wars, depressions, and human impatience. So in 1990 and 1991, 200 years after Franklin's death, almost to the day, the trust finally closed. Boston's fund had grown to about $4.5 million. Philadelphia's had grown to about $2 million. Both numbers are far below Franklin's most optimistic projection. And both numbers are also almost unimaginably larger than the original gift of about $4,000 each. Let that sink in for a moment. A gift smaller than the price of a used car today turned into millions, without Franklin adding a single extra dollar after his death. He did not work harder. He did not get lucky in the stock market. He simply chose an interest rate, chose a long enough amount of time, and refused to touch it. That money did not just multiply on paper, either. Along the way, across 2 centuries, it quietly helped fund the beginnings of what is now the Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology in Boston and supported the Franklin Institute Science Museum in Philadelphia, institutions that have gone on to teach and train thousands of young people, the same kind of young people Franklin was trying to help in the first place. If this story is teaching you something, take a second right now and drop a comment telling us what surprised you the most, because we read every one of them. So why does any of this matter to you? Sitting here in your life, in a world with credit cards and phones and instant everything? Because the exact same force that turned $4,000 into millions works in your bank account right now, today, whether you notice it or not. Compound interest does not care if you are famous. It does not care if you're patient by nature. It only cares about 2 things, the rate and the time you give it. Franklin could not control the interest rate the world would offer 200 years later. But he controlled the one thing that mattered even more, how long he was willing to wait. Most people lose to compound interest, not because they make one huge mistake, but because they interrupt it. They pull the money out early. They spend a small amount because it looks too small to matter. They assume the real difference only comes later, so today's choice does not count. Franklin's story proves the opposite. The choice that changes everything is almost always the small, boring one made decades before anyone can see the result. Here is the modern version of Franklin's bet. It is not about leaving your money to a city for 2 centuries. It is about the $50 you could set aside this month instead of spending it, the small debt you pay off a little faster, the first dollar you choose not to touch. None of it feels dramatic in the moment. Franklin's original £1,000 did not feel dramatic in 1790 either. It felt like a strange old man giving away money he would never see again. It only became remarkable 200 years later to people who never knew his name. If this idea is worth passing on, share it with someone who is still on the fence about starting small, because that is exactly the decision this whole story is about. Before we close this loop completely, remember the question we opened with. Why would a dying man lock away his money for 200 years, refusing to see it grow, refusing all credit, refusing all thanks? Because Franklin understood something most people never fully accept. that the most powerful financial decisions are the ones you will not be alive to see pay off, and the second most powerful ones are the ones you make today, quietly, for a future self who is closer than you think. Somewhere out there right now, your own version of that 1,000 pounds is sitting untouched, waiting for you to decide whether 200 years from now, someone remembers what you started. Subscribe, and let's find the next story together.